From New York, this is Democracy Now!
Mayor de Blasio, do your job. Fire these officers. I'm calling for them to be fired today. You don't have to wait for anything else. You see, the DOJ, they failed us. So now you come forward and do your job.
Protests erupt after federal prosecutors say they will not bring civil rights charges against Daniel Pantaleo, the New York City police officer implicated in the death of Eric Garner, an African-American father of 6, killed when Pantaleo wrestled him to the ground, applying a fatal chokehold as Garner said, "I can't breathe," 11 times. We'll get reaction from Garner's mother and New York City public advocate Jumaane Williams. Then, as online shoppers around the country flock to Amazon's mega sale Prime Day this week, the retail giant faces growing outrage over its unsafe working conditions in collaboration with immigration enforcement.
We're doing this because it's Prime Day, and we hope that people choose who to give their money to. Do they want to give it to Amazon that is making so much money out of the misery of our communities? I hope no.
We'll speak with activists about Amazon's business practices and working conditions, and then to the heiress of the Disney fortune, who's once again speaking out about the wage gap for Disney workers after she went to them and spoke to workers there.
The Disney brand is an emotional one, a moral one. I would even say it is a brand that suggests love. I have spoken up as a Disney about Disney because I'm uniquely placed to do so, and because Disney is uniquely placed in American life. Those moral undertones and all that love need to be put to constructive use, because this is a moral issue.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The House of Representatives passed a resolution condemning President Trump's racist tweets about 4 progressive congresswomen of color, telling them to go back to the crime-infested places from which they came. 4 Republicans, as well as the recently independent Congressmember Justin Amash, joined with Democrats to approve the resolution. Trump's tweets were aimed at Congressmembers Ayanna Pressley, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar, all of whom are U.S. citizens, one a political refugee. This is House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
These comments from the White House are disgraceful and disgusting, and these comments are racist. How shameful to hear him continue to defend those offensive words that we have all heard him repeat not only about our members, but about countless others. Our caucus will continue to forcefully respond to those attacks on our members.
Congress members stopped short of censuring Trump, though, a measure pushed by Tennessee Congressmember Steve Cohen. The House debate temporarily came to a halt after Pelosi delivered her remarks as Republicans said her description of Trump's words as disgraceful, disgusting, and racist were out of order. The House then had to vote in favor of keeping her remarks on the congressional record. Meanwhile, Texas Congressmember Al Green introduced articles of impeachment against President Trump Tuesday, forcing the House to take up the measure later this week. Green's resolution does not guarantee a House vote, as lawmakers could decide to table or even kill the resolution. The issue of impeachment has divided Democratic lawmakers, with a number of outspoken legislators repeatedly calling for the move. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, however, has resisted those calls, focusing instead on congressional investigations. In May, she said impeaching Trump was too divisive and not worth it. White House counselor Kellyanne Conway, meanwhile, defended Trump's racist tweets. When a reporter asked her about it, she responded by asking him his ethnicity.
If the president was not telling these 4 congresswomen to return to their supposed countries of origin, to which countries was he referring?
What's your ethnicity?
Why is that relevant to this conversation?
Because I'm asking you a question. My ancestors are from Ireland and Italy.
Kellyanne, my own ethnicity is not relevant to the question I'm asking.
No, it is. Because you're asking about, he said, originally.
That question was posed by White House reporter Andrew Feinberg. He refused to answer Conway's question. A coalition of national rights groups filed a lawsuit Tuesday seeking to block a new Trump order that would bar asylum seekers who pass through another country before reaching the U.S. from applying for asylum. The ACLU, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and Center for Constitutional Rights are among those seeking an immediate injunction. The rule was set to go into effect Tuesday, but didn't appear to, as it faces legal challenges. Legal Alert of the ACLU called the new rule, quote, the Trump administration's most extreme run at an asylum ban yet, and said it clearly violates domestic and international law. On Tuesday, the UN Refugee Office condemned the plan, saying it puts vulnerable people at increased risk. A separate suit by two immigrants' rights groups was filed later Tuesday, arguing the rule violates the Immigration and Nationality Act and disrupts their ability to carry out their work, forcing them to drastically divert or redesign their programs. The white New York police officer who killed unarmed African-American father Eric Garner in 2014 will not face federal charges. Officer Daniel Pantaleo kept Garner in an illegal chokehold even as he gasped, "I can't breathe," 11 times. This is Garner's mother, Gwen Carr, speaking at a news conference yesterday, directly addressing New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio.
You say you care about the New York citizens? Come forward. Show yourself as a mayor, the mayor that you was elected to be. Because the Garner family is not satisfied with what you have done. My son is dead. My granddaughter is dead. And then all you're saying is sorry. You have my condolence. Well, keep your condolences and do the right thing. De Blasio, you and your administration, step up. Yeah. Get those police officers off the force today.
A senior Justice Department official said Attorney General William Barr made the call on Eric Garner's case, overruling officials from the Justice Department Civil Rights Division who wanted to charge Pantaleo. We'll have more on this after headlines. In California, former Peruvian President Alejandro Toledo was arrested Tuesday under an extradition order. He's facing corruption charges back in Peru, where he's accused of receiving $20 million from the Brazilian construction company Odebrecht in exchange for helping them win public works projects. Toledo, who was president from 2001 to 2006, has denied the charges. Another former Peruvian president, Alan Garcia, died by suicide in April after shooting himself as police arrived at his home in Lima to arrest him on bribery and corruption charges, also related to the Odebrecht bribery scandal. Press freedom groups are calling for the release of independent Yemeni journalist Yahya al-Sawari, who was arrested earlier this month by Yemeni security forces. At the time of his arrest, al-Sawari was reporting for the Sana'a Center for Strategic Studies and was interviewing protesters who were injured by forces belonging to the Saudi-led coalition. He was reportedly then handed over to Saudi forces. The Committee to Protect Journalists says journalists are known to have been imprisoned, threatened, and detained by all parties to the war in Yemen. Planned Parenthood has removed its president, Lena Wen, after less than a year on the job. Her ouster came after disagreements between Dr. Wen and Planned Parenthood's board over the direction of the organization as the Trump administration and Republicans mount harsh challenges to reproductive rights, including state abortion bans. The board reportedly had disagreements over Wen's framing of abortion. In more reproductive rights news, two groups, including Planned Parenthood of Illinois, said Tuesday they will stop accepting federal funds to avoid having to comply with a Trump ban on federally funded clinics providing abortion referrals. The rule went into effect this week as it's being challenged in the courts. California Senator, 2020 candidate Senator Kamala Harris, introduced a plan, she says, will lower prescription drug costs and crack down on pharmaceutical companies for charging exorbitant prices. Under the proposal, the government would be able to set fair prices for drugs based on their costs in other markets, and more affordable drugs could be imported from other countries. Manufacturers would suffer penalties if they raise their prices excessively, and 100% of their profits would also be taxed if they prescribe a medication above a set price. Earlier in the week, 2020 presidential hopeful, former Vice President Joe Biden, announced his health care plan, which builds on Obamacare by adding a public option rather than supporting Medicare for all, like many of his more progressive primary opponents, including Senators Harris, Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren. Biden's plan would also allow Medicare to negotiate with drug companies to lower costs and expand Medicaid. His proposal says it would ensure an estimated 97% of Americans, to which the Sanders campaign responded that leaves nearly 10 million people uninsured. It would also leave tens of millions underinsured and saddled with high co-pays and deductibles, according to an analysis of the proposal by the Sanders campaign. In Louisiana, a suspect has been arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of historian and civil rights activist Sadie Roberts-Joseph. Roberts-Joseph's dead body was found in her car over the weekend. 38-year-old Ron Jermaine Bell was Roberts-Joseph's tenant. He was reportedly late on his rent payments, though police say they're still determining a motive. Roberts-Joseph was considered a local icon in Baton Rouge, where she founded the Odell S. Williams Now and Then African American Museum and hosted the annual celebration of Juneteenth, which she fought to have recognized as a state and national holiday. Baton Rouge Mayor Weston Broom called her a standout matriarch of Baton Rouge and added, quote, "We will make her legacy a priority here in Baton Rouge and East Baton Rouge Parish." A federal magistrate judge said the founder and editor of the neo-Nazi website The Daily Stormer should be ordered to pay over $14 million to a Montana woman who was the target of an anti-Semitic troll storm. The Daily Stormer publisher Andrew Anglin mounted an online intimidation campaign in 2016 against Tanya Gersh, a Jewish real estate agent from the resort town of Whitefish, Montana. In the following months, Gersh and her family received hundreds of hate-filled messages, forcing them to temporarily leave their home. A Virginia state judge sentenced James Fields to life in prison plus 419 years for plowing his car into a crowd of anti-racist protesters in Charlottesville at a counter-protest of the white supremacist Unite the Right rally in 2017. He killed 32-year-old activist Heather Heyer in the attack. This comes on top of last month's sentence to life in prison on federal hate crimes charges for the 22-year-old self-described neo-Nazi. The judge in James Fields' case told him, quote, "You deserve the sentence the jury gave. What you did was an act of terror." Retired Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens has died at the age of 99. Stevens was appointed to the court in 1975 by President Gerald Ford. Although a moderate Republican, Stevens led the liberal wing of the court for decades and is considered a hugely influential justice who authored key decisions on cases around presidential powers, national security, and campaign financing, among other issues. In his dissent in 2000's Bush v. Gore, he wrote, "Although we may never know with complete certainty the identity of the winner of this year's presidential election, the identity of the loser is clear. It's the nation's confidence in the judge as impartial guardian of the rule of law," he said. At the height of President George W. Bush's war on terror, he wrote the decision granting Guantanamo prisoners legal rights and access to federal courts. In his dissent for Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, he wrote the decision, quote, "threatens to undermine the integrity of elected institutions across the nation." Stevens said at the end of his tenure on the court that his one regret was his 1976 vote upholding a Texas capital punishment statute that revived the death penalty around the country. Stevens later opposed most death penalty sentences. He retired from the court in 2010 as the second longest-standing justice. And 10 protesters were arrested inside ICE headquarters in Washington, D.C. Tuesday after staging a sit-in at the agency's building. Thousands more blocked entrances to the building and nearby roads for hours. The protests were organized by the Jewish-led group Never Again Action and the immigration justice group Movimiento Cosecha. The activists are demanding the government shut down all immigration jails, abolish ICE, and provide an immediate path to citizenship for undocumented people. Similar protests took place in other U.S. cities, including Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and Boston. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world. It was 5 years ago today, Eric Garner, an African-American father of 6, was killed when a white New York City police officer wrestled him to the ground, pinned him down, and applied a fatal chokehold while Garner said, "I can't breathe," 11 times. The incident was captured on a cell phone video and spurred mass protests.
Put your hand behind your back. I can't breathe. 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 I can't breathe.
Once again, police beating up on people. Back up right here. Back up and get on that step. Okay.
On Tuesday, federal prosecutors announced they will not bring civil rights charges against Daniel Pantaleo, the New York City police officer implicated in Garner's death. The move reportedly came after Attorney General William Barr ordered that the case be dropped. U.S. Attorney Richard Donoghue announced the decision Tuesday.
We evaluated Officer Pantaleo's actions in light of his training and experience, Mr. Garner's size, weight, and actions to resist arrest, and the duration and escalating nature of the interaction. We determined that was insufficient evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Pantaleo acted in willful violation of federal law. As a result, we conclude that there is insufficient evidence to bring a federal criminal charge against Officer Pantaleo for his role in the untimely death of Mr. Garner.
Earlier this year, a medical examiner testified it was a chokehold that triggered an asthma attack that led to Garner's death, which was ruled a homicide. The New York Police Department banned the use of chokeholds in 1993 after it was linked to a rise in deaths. Garner family member met with federal officials shortly before the announcement. This is Garner's daughter, Emerald Snipes, speaking outside the U.S. Attorney's Office in Brooklyn.
Here in the spirit of my sister, who fought for justice until her dying day for my father, standing outside protesting. She called the CCRB to do this investigation, and they didn't do their job. We called the Department of Justice. They didn't do their job.
During a rally at City Hall, Eric Garner's mother, Gwen Carr, called on New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio to fire Officer Pantaleo, who remains on the police force and earns a salary of more than $100,000.
And DOJ, you have not heard the last from us. Tomorrow was supposed to be the end of the statute of limitations, but let me tell you something. There is no statutes of limitation on murder. That's what I read in the law books, that murder, there is no statute of limitations. And so we are going after you, Pantaleo. Mayor de Blasio, do your job. Fire these officers. I'm calling for them to be fired today. You don't have to wait for anything else. You see, the DOJ, they failed us. So now you come forward and do your job. You say you care about the New York citizens. Come forward. Show yourself as a mayor, the mayor that you was elected to be. Because the Garner family is not satisfied with what you have done. My son is dead. My granddaughter is dead. And then all you're saying is sorry. You have my condolence. Well, keep your condolences and do the right thing. De Blasio, you and your administration, step up. Yeah. Get those police officers off the force. Today, I'm asking for them to be fired. We don't want to wait any longer. You have the power, so assert your power.
No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace!
We had hoped we'd be joined by Gwen Carr this morning. She won't be with us, but we are joined by Jumaane Williams, public advocate for New York City, who was at the news conference with her yesterday at City Hall. Welcome back to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us,
Thanks
public advocate of New York City. Your response to this decision that apparently was made by the Attorney General of the United States himself, William Barr.
Well, I do want to be clear what we're talking about. Now, all we're talking about is firing this man from the police department. We're not talking about a criminal conviction. We're not talking about civil rights violations. Someone murdered someone on camera, and all we have left is at least fire him from the police department. Obviously, the DOJ made the wrong decision, but I do have to say they had the highest burden. And if we can't get Mayor de Blasio, self-described progressive who's running for president, to fire Pantaleo, how do you expect Donald Trump's DOJ to bring civil rights violations against him?
But, Jumaane Williams, I'd like to ask you about, in terms of the Justice Department decision, because the Attorney General apparently ruled that it was not, and the prosecutors, some of the prosecutors, because there's reportedly, according to the New York Times, conflicts between prosecutors in the Justice Department as to whether they could bring a case, that they were going to have trouble proving an intent on the part of Pantaleo to actually harm Eric Garner. But the last time a police officer was convicted of a murder or of violating civil rights was back in 1998 when Francis Lavodi was convicted of civil rights violations during the Clinton years for an illegal chokehold that led to the death of Anthony Baez. Back then, there was no video. There was no video to show what actually happened, and so there's definitely clearly a precedent for this kind of case being brought and won. And I'm wondering what you think about this reported differences among the Justice Department officials about how to handle this case.
Well, one, I do want to remind people they may not want to hear it, but this is 2 presidents and 3 attorney generals that have been looking at this, and none of them have brought charges. I do think they were wrong, and they could have. But with that said, I don't want to absolve the DOJ, but I don't want to skip past where we are now. And by the way, during that time, that officer was fired from the police department by Mayor Rudolph Giuliani. And so now we have Mayor Giuliani who can fire an officer, and Mayor Bill de Blasio, self-described progressive, who's running around saying he wants to do for the nation what he's done for New York City, still has Daniel Pantaleo on the force.
We called, by the way, the mayor's office, and we didn't get response back. But talk about that. What do you demand that he do? And I'm sure you've had many discussions with Mayor de Blasio. You're the public advocate. He's the mayor. What does he tell you?
I'm at a loss of words. Because we have a man who was elected on police reform issues, on the backs of stories and blood of black and brown New Yorkers, saying that they'll make changes in the police department. And there have been, and I always want to give credit. But where there hasn't been is transparency and accountability.
Well, let's go to Mayor de Blasio himself. Last month, just after the New York Police Department disciplinary hearing concluded for Daniel Pantaleo, New York Mayor Bill de Blasio appeared on WNYC Radio's Bill Lehrer show.
But the NYPD is finishing its process now. A final judgment will be delivered soon. And that will be the closure point, at least from the perspective of the city of New York. But this whole thing has been so painful for all of us, and most especially for this family. I just wish the Department of Justice had done their job either way and just made a decision.
Commissioner O'Neill will have to make a decision about if and how to discipline Officer Pantaleo. With all the evidence in now, what do you think should be done? And if the commissioner doesn't fire him, should you?
Brian, I'm not going to entertain hypotheticals, and I'm not going to, in the middle of a due process procedure, I'm not going to in any way, shape, or form be disrespectful of that process. You know, everyone, and I want to say this to everyone listening, including many, many people like me who are progressives, we have to always respect due process. We all want due process for ourselves. We need it for everyone. So that is what's happening right now. And then the ultimate decision will go to the police commissioner, and I think he is someone who will be very, very mindful and will think in terms of fairness and justice, as I've seen him do many times.
Are you saying you won't overrule his decision, even if you disagree with him?
Respectfully, this is very, very serious stuff. This is a legal proceeding. I understand what you're trying to do, and I know you're a good journalist, but you have to understand, this is serious stuff. This is about people's lives. I am not commenting on due process. It has to take its course.
That was WNYC's Brian Lair interviewing Mayor Bill de Blasio on this issue of the Eric Garner case. I wanted to ask you, Jumaane Williams, what about the mayor's argument that he's waiting for the due process procedure, which includes a departmental trial, which Pantaleo has gone through, and which he's awaiting a decision of the judge in that departmental hearing to decide what steps to take?
I get angrier and angrier the more I hear this mayor. He should no longer mention the name Eric Garner. He should no longer tell the family that he's sorry. He should no longer speak about this. He has had the authority the whole time to fire Daniel Pantaleo. He's had the authority to at least suspend him. He's had the authority to do something. He misled the public for so long, saying that the DOJ asked them not to proceed. That was not the truth. The DOJ told the family and us that there's nothing stopping them. In fact, they started their own departmental trial before the DOJ. This is fully, completely in the mayor's wheelhouse. This has been this is all this mayor. He has let down black and brown New Yorkers and all New Yorkers who believe in justice when it comes to police doing wrong. He has done this. This is fully in his wheelhouse. Anything else is BS, and he needs to just stop. He needs to own this and do right by this family.
And of course, you as public advocate, in the unlikely case that Bill de Blasio is successful in his run for president, you would step in as the mayor, right? You're the designated successor to an empty mayoral seat. So you're saying that you would definitely then immediately fire Pantaleo if you ended up becoming mayor.
Apparently, the only people who believe that Daniel Pantaleo should not be fired is Pat Lynch from the PBA and Bill de Blasio, the mayor.
I want to turn right now to the U.S. Attorney Richard Donoghue speaking during the news conference on Tuesday as he announced the federal government would not charge Officer Daniel Pantaleo in the murder of Eric Garner.
Attorney General Barr thoroughly considered this case and made a decision himself, and that is the decision of the department. Officer Pantaleo was not engaged in a chokehold on Mr. Gardner when he said he could not breathe. And neither Officer Pantaleo nor any other officer applied a chokehold to Mr. Gardner after he first said he could not breathe. The video shows that the officer's initial actions were in accordance with established police tactics and procedures, but that the situation deteriorated as it progressed. At the end of the day, however, the video and the other evidence gathered in the investigation does not establish beyond a reasonable doubt that Officer Pantaleo acted willfully in violation of federal law. I offered my sincere condolences, as well as the condolences of Attorney General Barr and the entire department, to the family for this tragic loss.
So that's U.S. Attorney Richard Donoghue explaining why they were not bringing civil rights charges against Officer Pantaleo. As you listen to this, Jumaane Williams, he said that Eric Garner did not say, "I can't breathe," while he was in a chokehold. As we all watch this video, and let me remind people, the video was taken by a friend of Eric Garner, who was right by the incident that was taking place. He just flipped open his cell phone. His name was Ramsey Orta, and he just kept on filming as the police demanded he stop filming. That's why we know what took place.
By the way, he's the only one who's seen inside of a jail cell since this all happened, the person who filmed this.
He's currently in solitary confinement.
I don't even understand what that means. So you just admitted that there was a chokehold. You're just saying the time of the chokehold wasn't at when he said, "I can't breathe." I don't know what that means. There was an illegal chokehold that was used that precipitated the death of a man by a police officer. There is no reason that there was a chokehold. There was no one in danger. We're still looking for the cigarettes that apparently he was selling. Like, nothing about this case is... and I lost the words 5 years later. When a family who... it wasn't a body cam issue. Everybody is clear in what we saw. A man choked to death by a police officer. Everyone agrees that something wrong happened. Everyone is giving their condolences. But Nobody's saying that someone should be held accountable who has the power to do so. And that's the frustration. I expected the DOJ to do this. It's unfortunate. I think they had the wrong decision. But here in the city, we have the power to provide some semblance of justice, and that lies with the mayor.
And as we wrap up, is there anything you, as the public advocate, can you see yourself doing anything?
We can put resolutions in as a city council. We can continue to put the pressure on, which we will. I'm going to join the activists in the Gwen Carr, the mother, and the Garner family to continue to put pressure. We're not going to let up on this, and we're going to continue to remind everyone across the nation that this mayor is running for president while Daniel Pantaleo is still on the force. It was 5 years ago today that Eric Garner was killed in a chokehold as he went down in Staten Island, being held by Danielle Pantaleo. Jumaane Williams is public advocate for New York City. There are protests and vigils planned for today. When we come back, we will look at what's happening at Amazon. There was testimony in Congress, and there were protests all over the world. Stay with us.
Wake up, everybody. No more sleeping in bed. No more backward thinking. Time for thinking ahead. The world has changed so very much from the way it used to be. There's so much hatred, war and poverty. Wake up, all the teachers. Time to teach a new way. Maybe then they'll listen to what you have to say. They're the ones who's coming up, and the world is in their hands. When you teach the children, teach them the very best you can. The world won't get no better if we just let it be. The world won't get no better. We gotta change it. And wake up all the doctors, make the poor people well. They're the ones who suffer and catch all the hell. They don't have so very long for their judgment day. So won't you make them happy before they pass away? Well,
Wake Up Everybody by Keb Mo. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
While online shoppers around the country flocked to Amazon's mega sale Prime Day this week, the retail giant faced growing outrage from protesters, workers, and lawmakers for its unsafe working conditions, collaboration with immigration and customs enforcement, and anti-competitive and anti-union business practices. In Minnesota, workers at an Amazon warehouse, many of whom are immigrants from East African nations, walked out for a 6-hour strike and demanded the company implement better working conditions and corporate responsibility policies. In New York City, activists delivered the petition to the home of Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos. Demonstrators in Seattle delivered a petition with over 270,000 signatures to Amazon headquarters, calling out its exploitation of workers and demanding it stop working with ICE. Amazon has contracted with U.S. government agencies, including ICE, to develop facial recognition software, which is being pitched as a tool for targeting immigrants. This is activist Maru Mora Villalpondo.
We're doing this because it's Prime Day, and we hope that people choose who to give their money to. Do they want to give it to Amazon that is making so much money out of the misery of our communities? I hope no.
In Europe, workers in Germany, Britain, Spain, and Poland are also taking part in protests this week, calling for fair wages and working conditions.
While the strike against Amazon unfolded, lawmakers, including Senator Bernie Sanders and Congressmember Ilhan Omar, co-signed a letter to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, demanding a full investigation into Amazon's workplace conditions Tuesday. The letter cited reports of Amazon workers facing severe physical and mental distress while on the job, often unable to take water or bathroom breaks while working in unsafe conditions. It quoted one worker who called Amazon a 21st century sweatshop and multiple others who reported contemplating suicide due to the work. The lawmakers write, quote, owing to the breadth and severity of past violations, as well as mounting public revelations of brutal and hazardous working conditions, we request that OSHA launch a thorough and comprehensive investigation into the workplace conditions at all of Amazon's warehouses. No employee, especially those who work for the wealthiest person in the world, should be forced to work in unsafe conditions. Also Tuesday, the House Judiciary Committee's antitrust panel challenged an Amazon executive on allegations that the company competes against its own sellers. The European Union's Competition Commission has also launched an antitrust investigation into Amazon. For more on the fight against Amazon, we're joined by two guests. Here in New York, we're joined by Ángeles Solís, lead organizer on the Workplace Justice Team at Make the Road New York. She helps lead the group's Beyond Amazon Coalition. And joining us from Portland, Maine, is Stacey Mitchell. She testified about Amazon on Tuesday before a House Judiciary Subcommittee. She's co-director of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance and author of Big Box Swindle, The True Cost of Mega Retailers and the Fight for America's Independent Businesses. Last year, Stacey Mitchell wrote a cover story for The Nation headlined, Amazon doesn't just want to dominate the market, it wants to become the market. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Ángeles, let's start with you. Talk about as Prime Day is offered all over the world, and explain what that is, what people did on the ground.
Oof. Well, Prime Day is essentially Amazon's Black Friday in the middle of the summer. It's a made-up holiday to sell products that many of us don't need. However, our organizing against Prime Day actually started even before the 15th and the 16th. On July 11th, Amazon had their annual Web Services Summit here in New York City. Over 9,000 participants came to assist tech coding workshops. Corporate clients of Amazon and Amazon employees gathered. And we had over 500 immigrants, community members, warehouse workers demonstrating outside. We had over 30 disruptors on the inside directly disrupting and speaking to Vice President of Amazon and Chief Technical Officer Werner Vogels, demanding that they cut their ties with ICE and asking that they respect workers.
Well, what about the working conditions at some of these Amazon or most of these Amazon facilities? I remember back more than a year ago, some of my students at Rutgers University did an investigation on Amazon. They filed OSHA Freedom of Information requests from OSHA about workplace injuries. They got back hundreds of pages, most of it redacted, with Amazon claiming it was a part of their company protected secrets, that some of the information could not be let out, yet it repeatedly received fines over and over from OSHA. What about these working conditions?
Absolutely. Yeah, Amazon will do their best to cover up, to silence, and divide workers that are speaking out. They also love to publish, especially around this time of year, as many of you may have already have seen, the tours that they offer, the pictures and videos of Amazon warehouse employees holding Prime Day signs and dancing around. But those stories do not match up with the stories of workers coming through our doors, stories of workers who have shared complaints of chronic nosebleeds from cutting up cardboard boxes and the dust getting inside of their noses and not getting the proper protective equipment that they need. Stories of workers who have been interrogated by management, asking what they did for 72 seconds when they slowed down. Stories of workers that have faced repeated harassment, repeated discrimination, and have been made to feel like they're machines and not humans working in a warehouse.
And this issue that the company trumpets, that it's now paying $15 an hour, what most people don't realize is that there are a lot of temporary workers at Amazon. Not just there's their full-time employees, but for every full-time employee, there's a temporary worker. Are the salaries the same for the temp workers as they are? Many of them which are contracted out by other labor suppliers.
Amazon will claim that they are. Now, the reality is that they strategically subcontracted not just in their fulfillment and distribution centers, but across the entirety of their supply chain. chain. Amazon has a routine record of mistreating workers in their corporate tech offices, to their app-based driving services, and warehouse workers as well. And they may claim, yes, $15 an hour, but in this day and age, $15 an hour across our economy often isn't enough. And let's not just talk about a living wage, let's talk about a fair wage. We're talking about the richest man on the planet. Prime Day is estimated to make $5.8 billion in sales. Now, the stories of workers we have in our offices are ones of brutal conditions, and they see nothing in return. They see no fruits of that labor, no fruits of that profit coming back to their pockets.
Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, as I said earlier, and Congressmember Ilhan Omar of Minnesota have called for a complete investigation into workplace safety at Amazon warehouses. This is part of a video the Sanders campaign released Tuesday on Twitter.
Let me briefly relate to you a few of the stories that Amazon employees have told us. A former employee from Fort Worth, Texas, said, I was homeless, sleeping in the parking lot after I no longer could afford rent.
Maybe that's why Amazon is experimenting with drones, because they work and they don't complain.
A former Amazon worker from San Antonio told us Amazon's fulfillment centers are not designed with human beings in mind. If anyone wanted to experience what a turn of the 20th century American sweatshop might have looked, sounded, and felt like, they could look no further than Amazon.
Amazon has faced criticism from workers over their willingness to accommodate basic human needs like using the bathroom. 7 lawsuits have been filed against them by pregnant workers who say they were refused longer bathroom breaks and fewer continuous hours on their feet.
I actually gave myself a hernia trying to go to the bathroom faster within 1 minute 30 seconds, because over 1 minute 30 seconds, it counts against you.
Amazon increased the speed we have to work and pressure. This is cause injury and health issues. We need Amazon to reduce the speed we have to work and treat us like a human, not like a machine.
So that's the video that Bernie Sanders, the senator and presidential candidate, released. Amazon has something like around the world 575,000 workers, over 200,000 workers here in the United States. As we hear about workplace conditions, also this issue of cooperation with ICE. Can you talk about Amazon's use of facial recognition software?
Yes. Recently, Amazon has been marketing and soliciting to federal agencies like Immigration and Customs Enforcement the use of their recognition, spelled with a K, technology. And this technology...
That's their brand name, you mean,
that's
spelled
right,
with a K.
Right. This technology is absolutely concerning to us. It is absolutely dangerous to immigrant communities and communities of color. It has a higher rate on women, gender-conforming individuals and people of color. And this technology can identify up to 500 people in a photo or in a video. Now, in the hands of ICE, in the hands of CBP, this is exactly the type of technology that Trump wants to expand the platforms of imprisonment, detainment, deportation, and even, yes, death of immigrants and children in ICE detention camps, in CBP holding facilities, and in conditions on our border. So Amazon is absolutely enabling the technology of ICE, Customs and Border Patrol, and DHS in perpetuating the harm on immigrant communities in our country. And it's not just the facial recognition software we have to be worried about. Amazon Web Services hosts all of the technology infrastructure for Palantir and a number of other companies that carry out their operations for ICE and DHS and CBP, right? So without Amazon Web Services, Palantir cannot rip families apart, cannot identify and collect and build profiles of immigrants that they will then ultimately harm and deport.
And Stacey Mitchell, we're also joined by you. You testified at Amazon on Tuesday before the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Antitrust, Commercial, and Administrative Law. You're the co-director of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance and author of The Big Box Swindle, The True Cost of Mega Retailers and the Fight for America's Independent Businesses. What did you tell Congress?
Well, I talked about how Amazon's market power has become really quite overwhelming. They are increasingly taking control of the entire consumer goods economy. They capture $1 out of every $2 that Americans now spend online. And of course, online sales are booming. Perhaps the bigger measure of Amazon's market power is that more than half of all shoppers, when they want to buy something online, are now starting directly on Amazon. And what that means is if you're any any other company in the economy that makes or sells a consumer product, increasingly you have to be on Amazon's platform in order to reach the market. That's an incredible amount of structural power in our economy. And I think, just more broadly speaking, as Amazon amasses that power and wealth, it's really working as a kind of undertow on local economies across the country. It's affecting the ability of people to earn a living.
Well, Stacey, 20 years ago, people used to complain about Walmart because as Walmarts were being built all across America, they were supposedly destroying the local mom-and-pop stores. But you could at least say for Walmart that they employ 1.5 million people in the United States. Here we're talking about Amazon, which is bigger, much bigger than Walmart today, but is only employing 200,000 people. What is Amazon's effect on small businesses and even big retailers now across the country?
Yeah. Well, Amazon is not, in fact, bigger than Walmart yet. They are certainly more dominant online. There's a distinction that's important. I think Walmart is a very concerning company because of its market dominance, particularly in the grocery sector and the effect that it's having on local communities. 35 years ago, we essentially shelved our antitrust laws. We used to, antitrust was a tool of democracy, of keeping power dispersed, and we basically put those laws on the shelf and stopped enforcing them. Walmart grew up in that time period. It owes its dominance in part to that lax enforcement. So does Amazon. The distinction with Amazon is, Walmart dominates the retail market, but Amazon is essentially infrastructure for the economy. It would be almost as if Walmart came into your community and not only built this giant store on the edge of town, but also bought up all of your Main Street retail spaces, all of the, bought the malls, and basically could dictate which businesses could be in those spaces, what they could sell, and which ones were going to succeed. That's essentially what's going on online now. Amazon calls the shots. All these other retailers and merchants that depend on its platform in order to reach the market are subject to it. It can change the rules. It can close their account. It can favor its own products. It can mine all the data from those sellers' transactions to learn what's selling well and bring that into its own inventory and then award itself, the top placement in the search results. This is no longer a market in the sense of a market. It is a private arena governed by this single company. And that's really gets to the anti-competitive issue that was the subject of the hearing yesterday.
On Tuesday, Democratic Congress member David Cicilline of Rhode Island questioned the Associate General Counsel at Amazon, Nate Sutton.
I just want to give you an example of an entrepreneur in Rhode Island who creates a better set of headphones. She sells her product on Amazon on the marketplace. Sales soar, which is great for her, great for Amazon, because more people will become Amazon Prime customers to buy this great Rhode Island product. But instead of seeing the fruits of her success, the next thing that happens is that this hardworking Rhode Island discovers that Amazon has rolled out a direct replica of her product. And because Amazon controls the platform, Amazon gives itself top billing and demotes the entrepreneur to page 3 of the results, which most people will never see. So how would anyone, in light of that kind of sequence of events, how would any entrepreneur invest in this kind of environment where that can happen, where there's no assurance it won't?
Our incentive is to help the seller succeed because we rely on them. If we did that, we know they'd go elsewhere. They have many options. So we apply the same criteria to both, and we do not use their individual data when we're making decisions to launch private brands.
Thank you.
Nate Sutton, the Associate General Counsel at Amazon, answering the questions of the Rhode Island Congressmember David Cicilline. Stacey Mitchell, your response.
Yeah, well, it's simply not true that merchants have other options. Amazon's 1 out of every $2 spent online and a huge amount of shopping search. The next biggest one is eBay at about 6%. So it really drops off from there. I interview for our research lots of sellers, and they consistently tell me, Amazon is the main deal. There is really nowhere else. And increasingly, more and more over time, particularly as Prime memberships grow, as Alexa becomes the voice interface for a lot of homes, people are more and more defaulting to Amazon. And so we have to start to recognize that this is a different sort of company. This is an infrastructure company like a railroad or a telephone system. And that requires a different kind of public obligation, that there's a set of rules that need to go along with that.
Well, I wanted to ask you precisely about that, the comparison to the railroads. Should part of the legislative reform be to consider them a common carrier, where they couldn't necessarily discriminate by one particular company whose products they carry versus another?
That's right, and I believe that that's one of the ideas that's in the mix here is that we need to have a kind of non-discrimination standard, a common carrier standard for Amazon, so that all buyers and sellers in that marketplace are treated the same. It's not just sellers; it's also consumers. We could face a potential future in which Amazon price discriminates. That is, it uses the data it has on all of us to charge one person more than another person. We don't think that it's doing that yet, but that's certainly something that could happen. So we do need these non-discrimination rules. I will say, though, that because of the overwhelming conflict of interest here, that Amazon is competing directly with the companies that depend on its business. It is also a manufacturer of goods. It is a retailer of goods. That fundamental conflict, combined with the fact that the algorithms are so opaque and Amazon has like a godlike view of all of the data, all of the transactions that are going on, it can use that in all sorts of ways. I think that we also need to separate Amazon, that we need to call for a structural separation of this company, which is exactly what we did with the railroads. In the early days of the railroads, big industrialists like John D. Rockefeller, who was famous for the monopoly he amassed in oil, Standard Oil. He did that in part because he got control of the rails and he used the rail lines. He would keep his competing oil companies off those lines, or he would charge them more. And that's how he came to dominate the oil industry. In 1906, Congress passed a law and said, look, if you own a railroad, you can't also be engaged in lines of business that compete with the businesses that rely on that. Essentially a breakup. And that's what we need with Amazon.
Angelis, we're going to end with you. What are you calling for?
I am calling for Amazon. We are calling for Amazon to drop all of their contracts, all of their relationships, all of their ties to Immigration, Customs Enforcement, Customs and Border Patrol, and the Department of Homeland Security. We're calling for ICE to meet with workers, bargain with them at the table, respect workers, slow down on these grueling quotas, and really listen to the immigrants and communities that are calling for Amazon to actually be a better neighbor to our communities and not a corporate monopoly that's threatening our economy, our democracy, and the livelihoods of our families.
Well, I want to thank you both for being with us. Angelis Solis is Make the Road New York. Stacey Mitchell testified before Congress yesterday about Amazon before the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Antitrust, Commercial, and Administrative Law, a co-director of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance in Portland, Maine, and author of the book Big Box Swindle, The True Cost of Mega Retailers and the Fight for America's Independent Businesses. When we come back, we're going to speak with a Disney heiress. She went to Disneyland and spoke with workers there and was appalled by what she saw. Stay with us.
Working at this job is dirty and dangerous, and I'm taking risks anyway. Oh, if I had the time and the proper equipment, I could do my job safely each day. Everybody here says they're sticklers for safety, and I'm not here to say that they lie. I'm saying we just come to work here. We don't come to die. Now I don't want your chemicals clouding my brain. I want to keep all of my fingers and toes. I want to hear those cheers at both of my ears when my working days come to a close. Work that I do here is dangerous enough. Don't you rush me, and I'm telling you why. We just come to work here. We don't come to die. Now while you're up there talking in an air-conditioned office on a telephone that's OSHA approved, go on and tell me how much you've been spending on safety. Pardon me, I'm not moved.
We just came to work here. We don't come to die by Ann Feeney. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
The happiest place on earth. That's how Disneyland describes itself. But that's not the experience of thousands of its workers. And now it's the heiress of the Disney fortune who is once again speaking out about the company's unfair labor and wage practices after speaking to employees at the California theme park. Earlier this year, Abigail Disney, the granddaughter of Roy O. Disney, the co-founder of Walt Disney Company, made headlines when she called Disney CEO Bob Iger's salary, quote, insane.
In an op-ed for the Washington Post headlined, "It's time to call out Disney and anyone else rich off their workers' backs." Abigail Disney wrote, quote, Iger took home more than $65 million in 2018. That's 1,424 times the median pay of a Disney worker. At the pay levels we're talking about, an executive giving up half his bonus has zero effect on his quality of life. For the people at the bottom, it could mean a ticket out of poverty or debt. It could offer access to decent health care or an education for a child, unquote. Abigail Disney also testified in May at the House Committee on Financial Services. Well, for more, we go to Abigail Disney, filmmaker, activist, granddaughter of Roy O. Disney, co-founder of the Walt Disney Company, speaking to us from Cork, Ireland. Abigail, welcome back to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us. Talk about what you found.
Well, it was pretty clear what was happening there was that they were working to take those low-wage workers at Disney and basically turn them into people who had no recourse for appeal and no time enough to be able to stand up for themselves as workers, so that they would have an eternally refreshing class of people that would replace the ones who were unhappy. So it was, when I was young, it was a job for life, which is now not a thing in capitalism anymore. But there was a sense we had a responsibility as a company to take care of the people who took care of us, who were very much a part of the equation in terms of making the place a place you wanted to come back to. And now we're just basically seeing them as, endlessly replaceable people. There's a kind of a given in among people at the high end of the business world that low skilled workers, as they call them, are endlessly replaceable, and they a little bit deserve what they get because they don't have, higher skills.
And what's been the reaction among company executives to your continued raising of criticism of them? Not to mention your family.
Yeah. Two of my siblings are very supportive of what I'm doing. I also have members of my family who are not pleased. But the company has not reached out to me directly, interestingly enough. I think they see me as a gadfly and a problem. So they tend to pick up the phone and call whoever just interviewed me and dress them down. They're sending out targeted tweets to everybody on my Twitter follower page and telling them about their education program. So they kind of shadow me and they slap back with the idea that they pay a lot for education, which has nothing to do with paying the people who work today a fair price for the work they did today.
So let me ask you, when you testified, a 2017 study from Occidental College that surveyed 17,000 Disneyland workers, more than half the resort's employees, found many struggle to make ends meet. 10% reported having been homeless within the past 2 years. Two-thirds said they couldn't afford to eat 3 meals a day. 3/4, 75% said they were unable to pay all their bills at the end of each month. So, Abigail Disney, what are you calling for? We're talking about your family's company.
What I'm trying to do is have a sense of decency moment here, because we can quibble about CEO salaries until the end of time and who deserves what, and that's the other thing they clap back at me with is look at the profitability of the company. Of course, he deserves a big salary. Okay, that might or might not be true. We can talk about that. But if the company is so profitable, why are there people going hungry? So, we need to have a moment here and check in with what our values are as a society and say to ourselves, if people are doing that well at the top, how can we allow people who are working a full-time job, who are playing by every freaking rule, and allow them to go hungry and without health care and without housing?
And what does the CEO say, Iger, to what you said? How much does he make?
Okay. So for 2019, it'll be over $140 million, technically, all in. When I started this, I started using the lower number.
We have 20 seconds.
Yeah. Okay. So the $66 million for 2019, and when the merger goes through, 140.
And the merger is with?
with Fox, and they will be the largest media entity in the history of the United States or anywhere.
So we're going to do part 2 with you. We're going to post online at democracynow.org and find out exactly what the workers did say to you at Disneyland. Abigail Disney, filmmaker, activist, granddaughter of Roy O. Disney, the co-founder of the Walt Disney Company. That does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Burke, Dina Guster, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Tammy Warnoff, Sam Alcoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Honey Masood, Trina Endura, Tay Maria Studio, Libby Rainey. I'm Mike DeFilippo, Miguel and Laguerra, our engineers. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Thanks so much for joining us.